Creating these classes requires equipment and services that cost money. If you appreciate this education, please think about going to elithecomputerguy.com and offering a one-time or monthly recurring donation. Welcome back. So in today's video, I'm going to show you how to create a lab environment in order for you to do your MySQL projects. So as we go forward into future classes, I'm going to show you how to run SQL statements in MySQL, and obviously we're going to need a lab environment to allow you to do that. So basically what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be spinning up a virtual machine with Ubuntu Desktop operating system on it. We're then going to be using something called tasksel. Using tasksel, that will allow us to install a LAMP server, so that'll be Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP in a nice, easy, way to do things. And then we're going to log into MySQL. I'm going to show you a little bit, basically showing you that MySQL actually works. And then we're going to call it a day so that we can go into the next classes. So if you already have a MySQL database server up and running, you do not have to watch this video. This is just for new people. Basically, if you need some type of lab environment so that you can actually run MySQL statements, that is what we are going to do for you today. Now, warning, Will Robinson, warning. I'm sure some of the old timers out there, because for some reason I get old timers watching these videos, which I don't really understand what they're doing. These videos are for new people. They're for noobs. Go away, old timers. Go away. But anyways, a lot of times I get old timers watching these videos for noobs, and then they just rip me a new a-hole because I'm not teaching the noobs the proper way of doing things, right? So basically we're going to be using something called tasksel today, and so tasksel is a very easy way to get a LAMP server and other types of Ubuntu servers up and running, and a lot of people dislike it because it basically installs your MySQL, your PHP, your Apache in non-standard locations. It can be a bit quirky to deal with if you're actually dealing with things in the production environment. So a lot of people dislike using tasksel. Well, again, do remember whenever I'm trying to teach you folks classes, I'm literally trying to teach you as little as possible. Now that may seem like a joke and that may seem snarky, but it is actually true. I'm trying to hyper focus on whatever the hell it is that I'm trying to explain to you and not worry about all the other stuff. I was in your shoes 20 years ago, and I know what it's like when an instructor is trying to teach you networking and security and operating system and everything at one time. And when you're a new person, you don't understand anything, right? All this crap is getting lumped onto your brain at the exact same moment, and it's very hard to discern what the hell is what. What is security and what is the actual application, and what is networking and what is all of this different stuff. And unfortunately, a lot of people just simply get confused and they give up. So one of the things that I do, again, a lot of people complain and bitch and moan about how I do classes, is because a lot of times for these new classes, I just strip out security. We're not even going to worry about security. We're not going to worry about a lot of these best practices, because those best practices, that security, makes things very confusing for people. And again, they give up. So what we're going to do is we're going to hyper focus just on MySQL so you get comfortable using the MySQL database. And then once you understand that, in later classes, we can talk about how to secure the MySQL database and how to do things properly. So I will give you that one warning with, again, creating this particular lab. The old timers out there are probably going to bitch at you if you actually do this in the real world. Again, one of the other things, we will be using Ubuntu 18.04 in this particular class, and again, we're going to be using tasksel to install the LAMP server. Something to keep in mind is I actually had planned to teach you folks how to use MySQL using something called PHP Myadmin. So PHP Myadmin is actually a GUI, a graphical user interface that you can use in order to interact with MySQL. And I thought that would be an easy way of teaching you folks MySQL. Again, but the problem is I've used PHP at Myadmin for years now, 13, 14 years probably, and I've never had an issue with it in the past, to be honest with you. PHP Myadmin is the standard interface that you will use. So if you use a shared hosting platform, or if you use some kind of servers, cloud-based servers, in order to interact with your MySQL database, you will most likely use something called PHP Myadmin. And again, in the past, all you'd have to do is sudo apt-get install PHP Myadmin, do a couple of commands, and it was up and running, and it was working perfectly, and there are no issues. Well, again, Linux world, the real computer world, apparently apparently there's a problem with Ubuntu 18.04 and the version of PHP Myadmin that's in the repository. And so basically, in order to get PHP Myadmin working, you have to install it, but then you have to download it from PHP Myadmin, and then you have to do these other configurations, and then you have to do some troubleshooting in order to get PHP Myadmin to work. And that's, again, one of those places where I realized, oh, this is probably getting too complicated, especially for new people, and so we are going to skip that. So again, we were going to be using PHP Myadmin for the classes going forward, but again, apparently, for some reason, Ubuntu 18.04 does not like the PHP Myadmin that's in the repository. And to get PHP Myadmin up and running, I was going through all the steps and I was going through all the routines to make it work, and went, wow, this is a bit of a pain in the butt. So those are just some warnings for you and some things to be thinking about. With these classes, we're just going to be focusing, showing you how to do SQL statements, showing you how to create databases, insert data into databases, be able to pull data out of the databases, that type of thing. And so after looking at it, I just decided it would be better just to use MySQL from the actual command prompt and go from there. Again, it is important to understand in the technology world, as they say, there's 1,000 ways to skin a cat. Right? Anytime you're trying to accomplish something in the technology world, there's usually about a dozen different ways you can go about doing it. And so one of the things is, as a technology professional, you have to think about your user. You have to think about who you're providing the service for, and then figure out for their particular circumstance, what is the best way to provide that service. So again, as I started going forward, I realized trying to teach you folks with PHP Myadmin added too many steps. It added too much complication. I just realized too many people would most likely drop out simply because they couldn't get PHP Myadmin to work, and then that's not good for anybody. So by using this tasksel, this is simple, it's easy. If you understand how to install an Ubuntu operating system onto a virtual machine, I'll show you how to use tasksel, and you'll literally have MySQL up and running in a couple of minutes. So with that, let's get to the class. So for this particular lab, I'm going to be using VirtualBox to create an instance of Ubuntu Desktop 18.04. When that is up and running, we will then use tasksel to be able to install LAMP, Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP, and then after that is done, we will simply go into the MySQL server just to kind of show you that it exists, show you that in fact it does function, and then again, in the future, we will do more classes teaching you how to actually use MySQL. So with what I'm showing you today, you can spin this up with a virtual machine. If you have a physical server, you can do exactly what I'm doing here. One of the reasons that I decided to create the lab environment this way, using the GUI interface, basically the desktop GUI, so on and so forth, is so when we go into the future and we start using a little bit of PHP coding, that type of thing, we can run it on the server itself. So basically, the Ubuntu Desktop has Firefox, so we can open a web browser in Firefox in the server and be able to connect to any like PHP web pages that we're creating, and therefore we don't have to worry about network settings. We don't have to worry about firewall issues. We don't have to worry about any of that kind of stuff. Basically, we can have this one machine. We can run MySQL on this machine. We can create PHP code to be able to connect to the MySQL on the machine. We can then view the results of the PHP code on the machine. And again, we get to strip out any possible issues with networking problems, firewall problems, security problems, any of that kind of stuff. We have one self-contained box. So what I'm showing you today, again, you can either be doing this on a virtual machine. I'm using a MacBook Pro with VirtualBox on it, or you can have a physical box. Again, install Ubuntu Desktop on that, and then run tasksel, and you will have your lab environment. So with that, let's go over to the computer, and we'll show you how this works. So here we are at my MacBook Pro, and again, I've got VirtualBox open. So the instance we're going to be using today is this Ubuntu Desktop, again, 18.04, and I've created a version specifically for this MySQL class. One of the things I will say, if you're doing these kind of classes, you're doing these lab environments, what I would say is try to create one like a default version of whatever operating system that you're dealing with, and then when you do different projects, when you do different classes, you can go and you can clone that version. So you can basically copy that version so that you can then go play with the clone If you trash the clone, then all you have to do is you just simply then remove. You can then delete the clone, create a new clone, and go from there. So again, installing an operating system takes a little bit of time. Probably installing an operating system takes 10 or 15 minutes, especially doing the updates and all that type of thing. So if you can just create one default, like factory setting version, and then simply when you want to do new labs, new projects, you clone it, I would argue that's the best way to go. Now again, since this is Ubuntu Desktop, one of the big things when you create this particular instance is make sure you give it at least 4 gigs of RAM. So if you have the Ubuntu server version, you can have 512 RAM or maybe 1 gig RAM. But remember, if you're using the GUI version, this is a real graphic user environment, so you should give it 4 gigs of RAM. With that, all we have to do is double click and open it up, and we are now going to log into our Ubuntu box. So here we are. We have our nice little Ubuntu desktop up and running. And the first thing that we're going to do to make sure everything is up to date is you can go up here to this little search bar and you can do update. And then you can go here to software update. You click on the software update just to make sure everything is updated so you don't run into any kind of weird problems, right? Again, especially when you're going to be dealing with server environments and that type of thing, it's a good idea to update things first. So this particular box is already updated fully. So we're just going to hit OK. Then we're going to go down here again to this weird little the show application thing. We're going to go up to search and we're simply going to type in terminal. So we're going to use the terminal in order to do tasksel and the rest. So now we actually need to install tasksel. So tasksel is an app like other apps. So we'll do sudo apt-get install tasksel. Then we're going to hit enter. It's going to ask you the password for Bob, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Because again, I'm really serious about security. And then we're going to hit yes, because we want. And now this is going to simply install this application for us called tasksel. So that has now been installed. So we're going to hit clear. Then we can do sudo. And then from here, all you do is sudo and then tasksel. So if you're trying to remember this, all it is think about it as task select. So basically we're selecting what kind of server we want to create, and then we hit enter. And then this little thing comes up. So here, again, you can see there's lots of different types of servers that you can create rather easily. A DNS server. You've got, the LAMP server that we're going to be doing, Ubuntu things, a mail server, print server, Samba file server. So tasksel is actually a pretty easy, pretty cool little piece of software, and it's an easy way to be able to spin up servers. Again, some people argue about whether or not this is the best way to do it, but what I would argue is for a lab environment where you just need a server pretty quickly in order to be able to mess around with things, it's a good way to go. So here, what you do is you hit the space bar. So you select what you want and hit the space bar. So you hit the space bar and then you hit tab for OK, and then you hit OK. And now it's going to go through and it's going to install and retrieve all of our packages for us, which is a pretty simple, quick process. Again, as long as you have a computer that's, relatively recently new. Nothing here is too complicated or too hard. So it's going through, we're up to about 91% here, configuring Apache, see MySQL, was doing PHP before, right? So it's installing all of these different services for you so that you don't have to individually install them. So that's what makes it such a nice thing. It makes it so easy for deploying a LAMP server. So again, it's doing the mod files too, so all that. And so now we're back, right? So the cool part here, right? So we go to Firefox. First thing to do, since it's a LAMP server, so a LAMP server is a web server. So we simply open up Firefox, and just to make sure that the LAMP server is actually installed, we're going to go to 127.0.0.1. So what this is called is this is the loopback address. So this is the IP address of your computer. So whether you're on a Windows computer, whether you're on a Linux computer, whether you're on a Mac computer, the loopback address basically loops you back into your own computer. So if you're with a web browser, what this will do is loop you back into the web server that should be running on your particular computer. So we're going to hit enter, and there we go. We got the Apache to Ubuntu default page. This is the default welcome page used to test the correct operation of Apache 2 server after installation on Ubuntu systems. So basically, if you get this page, Apache 2 is working, or it's working good enough. It's working good enough to give you this page. If you don't get this page, then you've got other problems. Go to Google to figure that out. So you just want to make sure that this is up there. So this means basically your web server is actually working. Okay, so now we're going to log into MySQL using sudo MySQL. Now you may be looking at this. If you know anything about MySQL, you might be thinking, well, wait a minute. Aren't I supposed to log into MySQL using MySQL space -u space the username space -p? Isn't that the proper way to log into MySQL? Well, the thing is, with using tasksel this particular way in order to install your LAMP server, it does not create an additional user account for you. Basically, you only have the root user when you install MySQL this way, and so in order to be able to log in initially, you have to use sudo MySQL. So in the future, I will show you how to create user accounts for MySQL, and then you will be able to log in using those user accounts. But now, initially, you will be using sudo MySQL to be able to log in. You're going to be able to log in, and look at that. You get a blinking cursor. Yay! This is why so many people get frustrated with computers and then they give up. Again, they do not fail, they give up because they just get blinking cursors and they don't know what the hell to do with the blinking cursors. But if you know the commands to use, you'll be fine. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do show databases. Oops, make sure I don't mistype that. Bases, right? And then at the end of this, we are going to do the semicolon. So show databases will show the databases within this particular MySQL server. So since this is the initial installation, we just installed it, we'll simply have the default databases. But if this was a production server, you would see all of the databases that were on there. So let's say you had multiple WordPress websites. When we hit enter here, it would show you all the databases for those different WordPress websites. So we hit enter, and so it shows us the databases. So we have an information schema, MySQL, a performance schema, and a sys databases. So these are the different databases. Now, one of the important things when you're in the MySQL world is you do need that semicolon. You do need that semicolon. If you don't put in the semicolon, it will not know to run the command, which can be a royal pain in the butt, right? So if I do show databases, no semicolon, and hit enter, and keep hitting enter, oh no, what do I do? Mommy, what do I do? Hit semicolon and then hit enter. And then that actually runs the command. So again, this is one of the reasons that things like this can be incredibly frustrating, is you put in what you think is the right command, but if you forget that semicolon, you might get lost. So if you ever run into one of those positions where all you see is these weird little, whatever this arrow thing is, just hit the semicolon. Even if the command fails, at least the command will fail out, and then you can get back and try to type in the proper command. So with that, what we're going to do is we're actually going to go into the MySQL database. So this is the MySQL database. So we can do use MySQL. And so now the database has changed, and we are now actually in the MySQL database itself. Then from here, we can do show tables. So again, when I talked about the schema, a database is the highest level in the hierarchy. Then you have tables under that. Then we do semicolon, can't forget that. Then we hit enter, and we see all these different tables within the MySQL database. One of the ones that will be interested here is actually useful is the user table. So these are all the different user accounts within this particular database. And so what we can do is a command called describe, D-E-S-C, and then we do user, and then we do semicolon. We hit enter. And this gives us the different, basically the different columns within this particular table. So you have a host column with a data type of char up to 60, a column of user, again, characters up to 32. You have a whole bunch of, different privileges. yes or no configurations here, SSL cipher, those are blob data types like we talked about before, max questions, max updates, max connections, these are integers. Then we have a MySQL native password authentication string, that's text. We have a password last change, that's a timestamp data type. And so these are all the different columns, these are all the different fields within the user table. Now, if we actually want to take a look and see what users are in the user table, so basically this is what users are in this particular MySQL database server, we can do something called select user. So we're selecting the field user from the table user, right? So this is the user table. And so basically what we want is the user names from the user table. Then we're going to hit semicolon, and then we're going to hit enter. And now we can see the users for this particular MySQL database server. We have a Debian sys mate, we have a MySQL.sesh, we have MySQL.sys, and we have a root. So the root user is the actual user account that we're using right now. So if we create users in the future, Bob and Tim and Sue and all those different users, those users will pop up here. Now, one of the problems and one of the reasons why you need to know how to be able to write SQL statements to actually be able to give you the proper information is with this, what I did here. So this was a SQL statement. So basically what it does is select from the user column, basically select the users from the user table, right? So something to realize, and again, what gets people really confused is if you do select and then all. So a lot of times you'll see SQL statements where it says select all. So basically select all the columns in a particular table, print out all the information in the table. But if you do that for like the user table, what you're going to get is a lot of gobbledygook, right? So yeah, have fun with this. And this is why, again, it's very important to understand how SQL works, because the difference between something useful, as in you can see all the usernames in this particular database server, versus gobbledygook, is basically whether or not you can write a proper statement. So again, like I say, so if you just set select, and then user from user, now you get something that is actually pretty useful there. And so that just kind of shows you that this MySQL server is actually running. It is actually operational. You can go in there, you can play around a little bit. Don't worry if you do not understand these particular commands. I am going to show you all of this in the future classes, and by the end of this series, you will be sick of all of it. Now, again, the important question, okay, you know how to log in now, right? So, okay, with a fresh installation, you do sudo MySQL, so that logs you in. Okay, do you know how to get out? Do you know how to get out of the MySQL prompt? If your answer is exit, you are correct. There you go. So again, in the Linux world, in the computer world, you do not know how frustrating it can be to get into a prompt and literally have no idea how the hell to get out of it. So with MySQL, exit is the answer. So woo! You have a MySQL server. You have a full LAMP stack running. Isn't that cool and exciting? So again, we're using the Ubuntu Desktop version. So this is the graphical user interface version of Ubuntu. The reason that we're doing this is so that we have the local web browser so that we can use that loopback address 127.0.0.1 to be able to read websites, be able to read PHP code directly from the computer that we're working on. And the reason that we're doing that is so we don't have to worry about network configurations and firewalls or any of that kind of mess. Again, we are using tasksel here. A lot of people will argue about whether or not you should use tasksel. Again, at the end of the day, I don't care if you use tasksel. If you want to install Apache and MySQL and PHP and basically the modules to make all of those function together properly, you can go ahead and do that, and you'll end up basically with the same functional thing that we have here. It'll just take a little bit more effort, and one of my concerns is that you might run into some problems. Again, tasksel installs Apache, MySQL, PHP, and the modules all together in something functional. Whereas if you do it yourself and you forget a module, if you forget a configuration, then all of a sudden you're sitting there trying to troubleshoot those problems rather than actually trying to be able to learn what I'm trying to teach you. So that's why I would recommend tasksel. Again, in a real production environment, you may decide to go a different route there. Again, at the end of the day too, I was going to do the rest of the series using something called PHP Myadmin. PHP Myadmin is a very useful tool. Again, I still use it on my production web servers. My web servers that actually run it use PHP Myadmin just fine. But apparently, again, for some reason, the version of PHP Myadmin that's in the Ubuntu repository does not play nicely with 18.04. And so in order to make that work, basically duct tape that together, it can be a bit of a pain. So the reason I decided not to use PHP Myadmin for this particular series is simply, I don't want to get into that whole troubleshooting process. I don't want to lose people because you start to have problems installing PHP Myadmin, so you can never get to the whole MySQL component, right? And again, that's something that's very important to think about when you're learning, or for anybody out there trying to teach technical topics. So many times people try to teach so many things at one time that the student gets lost because they don't. A new student doesn't know the difference between MySQL and Apache or the php.ini file, right? You start talking about the php.ini file right after you start talking about MySQL statements, and they're going to think php.ini files and MySQL statements have anything in the world to do with each other. Where no, the php.ini file, that's for your PHP, Apache is for your Apache, MySQL is for your MySQL. These are different things, but one of the problems that people run into is they try to learn so many things at one time, and then they get confused about what relates to what. Is a virtual host, again, you start talking about Apache and virtual hosts, and they start thinking that has something to do with MySQL. It's like, no, let's just focus in on MySQL, learn SQL statements, and then once you learn MySQL, then we can start dealing with PHP, then we can start dealing with Apache, and then once you understand all of that, then we can go to more advanced configurations that you would actually put out in a production environment, and then once you understand that, then we can start talking about security and locking everything down. The problem is a lot of times people start worrying about security before they even know how to install anything, and it turns into a colossal mess. So anyways, that's basically all there is to creating this particular lab. Again, Ubuntu Desktop, sudo apt-get install tasksel, sudo tasksel, select the MySQL database server, install it, then do sudo MySQL, that drops you in. Then you start using SQL commands. If you don't remember the SQL commands, just remember exit. Remember semicolon. A semicolon actually sends the SQL statements. So basically, if you type something in and keep hitting enter, just hit a semicolon at some point. That'll actually run it. And then if you get totally confused and just frustrated, exit. EXIT will get you out of there. So as always, I enjoy doing this class and look forward to seeing you at the next one. Apparently, the type of content you just saw is not what Susan W. wants for the future of YouTube. This means that recommendations by YouTube to this channel have dropped massively and views are becoming comically small. I hate to ask. I used to say I would never ask, but if you could subscribe, like, comment, and most importantly, share the videos that you appreciate, that may help slow the death of this channel. Do remember that if anything at all happens to this channel, you can go to elithecomputerguy.com to view the content and access information not available on YouTube.